it turns out that our traumatized brain pays attention to everything. It's hyper aroused and hyper vigilant because it's now wired in a state that anything could be a threat to my survival. And when anything could be a threat, anything and everything is salient. And therefore, it's very hard to figure out what should I pay attention to. And in that noise, making good decisions is extremely hard.
All right, I am joined today by Dr. Jyoti Mishra, who is Associate Professor of Psychiatry in the UC San Diego School of Medicine and co-director of the UC Climate Change and Mental Health Initiative. Dr. Mishra, thank you for joining me on Urgent Futures.
Thank you. So delighted to be here.
So I found your work. As we've discussed, I'm doing kind of an ongoing series of podcast interviews with folks in the Rapid Response series who can speak to aspects of the unfolding catastrophe of the LA wildfires. And I found your work through your scholarship and output, public output around climate trauma. So I'd like to start there. What is climate trauma?
Climate trauma is a new term that's come about in the psychological literature, also the mental health literature, in the past 5 years or so. And this has come to encompass the multiple and complex mental health impacts that can come about from being witness to a climate disaster and also being impacted by it. And I'll say that climate trauma affects those who have witnessed the disaster sometimes almost as much as those who have been personally impacted, in that you could not lose a home, you could not have immediate family or personal injury of any kind, but still seeing your community burn down or by a wildfire such as the LA fires can have traumatic impacts on your mental health. In terms of symptoms, we don't have a specific category of symptoms, psychiatric symptoms that define climate trauma, but if you look at the complexity of the symptoms, there is post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, depression, anxiety, and there are real impacts on cognition as well as the brain as well.
And how is climate trauma currently being studied? Like, I understand that it's a new term, and so as it's kind of proliferating in sort of the scholarly dimensions, but also in public, how are you studying it, and how are you situating it differently than other forms of trauma?
There are multiple issues that influence climate trauma. A disaster such as the LA wildfires is interlinked with global warming and what has happened to our planet. Why are we seeing accelerated warming happening over the last, especially over the last couple of decades? It's literally come to our living rooms. It's not just something in a textbook that climate change is happening. And we are going to witness more of this in the future. So it's disasters are no longer just natural disasters. We talk about anthropogenic climate warming, global warming. And so there's the weaving of that narrative in climate trauma where for the planet, we are the traumatizer and the traumatized. It's not a one-way street here. And therefore, on the opposite side, solutions that are symbiotically benefiting the planet also benefit us. If we improve the ways that we take care of this planet, that will also improve our well-being. That's like the corollary of the traumatic, the climate trauma experience, so to say. And so this term really came about more in the psychological literature at first. by a man named Woodbury. When he defined it, it was sort of this circular relationship with the planet is how it was defined. And it also was defined with a lens of what's now understood as environmental justice, in that it affects communities that are disadvantaged, that already live in vulnerable regions, such as the areas that are right at the cusp of the forests and the urban areas. They're called wildland urban interface, the WI. And many communities live at that interface, and they live there because it's more affordable for them. Yet living there comes with consequences of poor healthcare access, poverty, and so there are all these socioeconomic disadvantages for many communities that then, because of where they live, they didn't choose to live there, but that's where they can afford to live, that then intersects with that being a climate vulnerable zone and it being affected by disasters more. And therefore, climate trauma ends up affecting people who are already very vulnerable due to other socioeconomic distresses. And ironically, these are the people that have done the least to cause such trauma. And so the term also recognizes that interplay within it. And my role in this whole framework really is to understand the mental health impacts, as I told you about PTSD, anxiety, depression, but also understand what's going on in the brain, and that we have biological understanding enough that our standard healthcare practitioners, our National Institutes of Health, these recognized institutions start to understand that climate trauma exists, that it needs to be treated, that people can have long-term impacts, and then also work with the community to develop resiliency solutions for such trauma. Yeah.
Wow, so much there. If I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like climate trauma is this large category that includes the economic justice and the social justice dimensions that you're describing, and then also spans all the way to the moral injury maybe of folks who know that they could be participating in healing the planet, regenerative infrastructure, and are not doing it. And so when disaster strikes, it can affect a broad range of people in different ways.
Absolutely, yes. So it's definitely more a post-disaster phenomena, as you have very nicely put it, and really impacts different people psychologically in different ways depending on their prior relationship with the climate and the place that they live in and so on. And it's distinct from how we understand climate anxiety, this general sense of a doom and gloom about the future that especially affects our youth today, that all is lost and we can't really do much to change the trajectory of the earth and the way global warming will end us impacting us all. That sense of anxiety of future doom is climate anxiety is distinct from the trauma that results from having had experience of a disaster. And it could be, vicarious experience, not exactly even being in the community while they're there. I would say that myself, since the fires have hit, having hosted family here with us who escaped the fires, having heard stories of friends who've been impacted. Also, talking about it in the media takes a sense of resilience, where in the background there's always images of distress and sounds of distress. So, recognizing that it's definitely most severe in individuals who are in the midst of it. Also, our first responders are very vulnerable to it. Our firefighters, our community workers who are helping out day and night, getting communities back in place. It's definitely something that can affect that group as well, but also the larger community can be impacted, albeit to a lesser extent of symptoms. It's not that it's extreme distress if you're not fully exposed, or if you're just reading about it in the media or hearing about it. But if you actually, when we did studies of California's deadliest wildfire to date, the Camp Fire, almost 40% of the population had symptoms that would cross a clinical threshold. So really recognizing that this is community-wide trauma. It's not for one individual to think about. It's really about community trauma, and that requires community-based healing, and really for us to be there for each other.
I want to get to the community-based healing, but just so we're not leaving listeners or viewers behind, would you be able to briefly outline the symptoms to be aware of as it relates to climate trauma-induced PTSD, anxiety, and depression?
Yeah, so sense of being in distress, in being continuously in low mood, having wanting to cry, wanting to stay in bed. That those are signs of depression. Anxiety can come even from anxiety can develop even from the air that we breathe. If it's full of toxic particles, it makes breathing difficult, and that difficult breathing, if that results in short breaths in any way, that mechanism and those brain centers are highly linked to our cognitive centers that then signal anxiety. And so a sense of mental health distress can result from difficulties and shortness in breathing as well. In children, there can be greater vulnerability, and they can have outbursts, behavioral outbursts, show irritability, have nightmares, have trouble sleeping, so all of these different symptoms can show up. And I'd say the cognitive impacts that are very common, that one feels distracted and unable to really focus attention on the tasks at hand. And one might find oneself doom scrolling, and you're on your phone trying to find one thing, and you're suddenly like hours later still doing that. So your attention, really being able to regulate your attention and being able to keep distractions at bay, it becomes very hard. And also staying away from impulsive decision making, turning towards, if you have to make, especially imagining that the state of a person who's just lost their home, they have to make very complex decisions about their long-term livelihood. It's not just about where they're going to get their dinner today. It's also about how all the rebuilding that they have to do. And in that state, immediate decisions can be easier, and long-term decisions are definitely impacted, as we've measured in the research. And what's notable is that these impacts are seen even months after the disaster. This is not just in the immediate aftermath.
Wow. Yeah, I had heard that some other folks had cautioned those who lost their homes against signing any documents while kind of in the immediate aftermath. What's your take on that?
Yeah, the immediate aftermath is really a time where you want to get into a routine with your life in a way that's possible for that moment. If you're in an evacuation shelter or living in a friend's home, what does that routine look like? how you can stay away from ruminating about the event that just affected you, and how you can stay in the present moment as much as possible and not allow that trauma to seep into the present moment, because the more you're going to allow that, the more climate trauma will persist to to be a longer term problem. So really, it's about taking care of yourself and also your family, and being open to taking support from others. Not just in supporting yourself on a daily basis, but also in these very important cognitive decisions about housing and monetary relief and your longer term rebuilding. It can be a mutual family decision that requires multiple people to really discuss the issue. And then if something needs to be done on a timeline, sure, but definitely take input from others, because recognize that at this point in time, your brain is not what it used to be prior to that event. Our work in this context has been labeled this signal, what's called the fire brain. Really, when we measure brain activity, we see that individuals who are impacted, in those cases specifically, you'll see a very hyper aroused frontal cortex. And this is to information that should be irrelevant or just be distracting. So we present information to individuals. They're doing a simple task, and there's certain information that you're supposed to attend to, and then other information that's distracting. And it's not like it's guesswork what is distracting. It's just saying something like pay attention to the blue fish and ignore the green fish or yellow fish or whatever. And it turns out that our traumatized brain pays attention to everything. It's hyper aroused and hyper vigilant because it's now wired in a state that anything could be a threat to my survival. And when anything could be a threat, and anything and everything is salient, and therefore it's very hard to figure out what should I pay attention to. And in that noise, making good decisions is extremely hard. And our brains are actually undergoing this phenomena, and to really be aware that this exists, and therefore there's no shame and no harm in taking help at all. So take help from others to make important decisions.
Well, that very beautifully brings us back to your points around these being collective traumas. Can you speak a little bit more to that, and why with collective traumas we need collective interventions as well?
Yeah, so, collective trauma, it means recognizing that it's happening not just to an isolated person in a household, it's happening to the entire community. And when, again, going back to our studies in the instance of the campfire, and then also other studies that people have done in the context of disasters, it's been shown that people who have greater emotional connection with their families, people who have a stronger sense of community, that they have a support from other community members, those who felt that, those individuals tend to be protected from developing long-term symptoms. That's why I stress on community-based healing. And also, I want to highlight that at this point, because we're still in the acute phase. The wildfires just happened, and in this period, the first month, it's still the acute phase where as much support that we provide to each other, we are able to mitigate the long-term impacts and from people developing long-term mental health symptoms. And if we can inculcate that sense of community and sense of family amongst our impacted community members, then that can result in better outcomes in the long term.
And so how can somebody be an attentive community member? Like they're hearing this and they want to, attend to folks in their family, in their community. What are some things that they can think about doing or kind of like offering into the situation?
Yeah, so there's obviously lots of resources online that talk about, where the fire shelters are and how to donate. And of course, I've also seen that people set up fundraisers for their immediate friends. That's a great way to help out. There are setting up meal trains, not just thinking about like a single day's help, but multiple days. How are they going to get food over the course of this entire month that they're going to be struggling to get disaster relief? But also a sense of mental health supports. Actually, we can all be great empathic listeners. Practicing just active listening skills and showing a sense of empathy towards another's experience can be an important way to give back. There's, if one wants to do more, there are free online psychological first aid trainings. Actually, we've put together a psychological first aid training that's going to happen on January 23rd. That's tomorrow as per when we're recording this. But it'll also be available as a recorded Zoom session, video Zoom, if anybody wants to come back to it. And these sessions can really help define how do you provide that psychological aid to a friend or a family member that's been impacted. And really think about how you can help others get back into a routine that they had, to not shy away from asking those questions. I still remember, my family in LA, and they recounted how a friend of theirs had lost their home. And while this had happened, the first text that my sister got in LA was, "Hey, I'm sorry, I can't return your books." It wasn't about the house burning down. It was about, she didn't say exactly why she can't return the books, but obviously we know why. There's a lot in that statement, and there's a lot not said there that could be about reaching out. That could be about, I need my personal space right now, and maybe I'll talk later. But it also could be, hey, I'm seeking a sense of normalcy here. And people want that. And people want to talk about the things that they would have usually talked about. So don't think it's odd when somebody reaches out to you and they've had a great catastrophic impact, but then they've come out to you and try to reconnect on a point where you left off the previous time you were talking to them. That's just a way of them reaching out for you to get back to them and say, hey, yeah, I want to talk to you now because you reached out at this moment. This is the time that I want to, come back to you. Because sometimes people can have very complex emotions about how do I tell others that I've just lost everything, and how to have a sense of self-integrity in that moment when you say that. And it's hard to say that. And therefore, the start of the communication can be very simple, like what I just mentioned. So it's, look out for cues like that from friends. Also not be hesitant to ask about something that may seem routine to do. And it's like, can I ask someone about, hey, we were actually planning to have a get together a week before all this unraveled, but of course the situation has changed. And when people ask me, what should I do? Should I not ask about that? It's like, figure out a sensitive way to ask that. Maybe get together is a great thing, and I know it's going to be logistically hard where you might have it. You might have to do it in a shelter, but the sense of belonging and community that can come from a get together and the sense of normalcy and routine, that's very important. And the last thing I'll mention is that experts in disaster supports, when they do this kind of training, they really talk about even simple skills that you can share with others, such as somebody, for example, said in the group of experts, they said, somebody in the audience raised their hand and they said, I'm actually really good at giving hugs. And this was an in-person training. It wasn't an online training. And so if you feel like you need a hug right now, come to me, So, and they look like a genuinely warm person, and, that's what they had to offer in that moment. So there's nothing too big or small that you can offer. And even, little acts of kindness are really big things that matter to people. So think about those. It doesn't have to be like, a huge donation or anything like that. Your time, your reaching out, that's most important.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's like a bucket of things you're describing, which is being mindful and cognizant of when people are kind of making an invitation to want to talk, but maybe aren't just directly saying, "Hey, my house burned down and I'm grieving." And then another category that's kind of like proactive offering, proactive invitation. How does this factor for people who are going inward, who are being non-communicative in response to climate trauma?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think it just needs patience. I think it needs good role modeling. This can happen especially in children. They can either act out or go, just become quieter. For them, it's important to show that we have together undergone a difficult challenge, and that at this moment, however, we are safe, and the community is, and together we are trying to rebuild. And so you are safe with me in this environment. And as much as that can be demonstrated, even if they don't want to communicate further, I think it's important. And I think over time, people will, find their ways to come out of where they have been. And sometimes, yes, it's true, people are quiet. And this happens as a university professor when I teach classes. Some of the kids are, really non-communicative in the first few sessions, but will have incredible things to share in the later sessions, and which shows that they are assimilating everything. They're actively learning from what's happening in the environment, but it just takes them longer to process that sense of safety and sense of belonging, and that they have a voice in this setting. And as long as we can continue to show that and have faith that people will come and communicate when they feel the time is right.
This also gets at the idea of resilience, which plays a big part in your work, because we're talking about, the acute trauma of the moment, but there's also this much longer chronic quality of either respectively fragility or resilience. Talk to me about the role that resilience can play when thinking about weathering these individualized traumatic events, but by developing that sort of resiliency over time.
Yeah, I mean, resiliency over time is obviously tricky because it's, we all go through our seasons of high mood and low mood, and there are times when, you'll find the most inspirational person, in despair also. And sometimes it's this really fine line that we walk, that when you feel deeply, you can be grieving deeply, but then that also spurs you to act forcefully towards the cause that you believe in. And so, long-term resilience, I strongly think, comes from, not just I strongly think, but the literature also shows, it comes from collective efficacy, collective action, of really feeling a sense of belonging, of being a part of a bigger whole, of a bigger movement, of a bigger set of people who are trying to change the world in a way that you find meaningful. And that really, being part of that collective really helps to not have the entire burden come at you. Climate change is not for one person to solve. It's not, when we are bombarded by the media and sometimes about how we should have this guilt of all the consumption that we do that is polluting the planet, like single-use plastics and many examples like that, and we should live lives that are more sustainable. Well, guess what? Our economies, our consumer-based economies, don't allow for much of that life to be lived in a sustainable way. And that's how many people actually develop symptoms of distress, because when you actually go into the depths of trying to be fully sustainable, trying to live like another species on this planet, an animal that does not pollute, it's very impossible to be someone who does not generate any trash, say, so but that's not for one person to solve. It's not, that kind of despair can lead to nihilism and depression and so on. But when you become part of a collective and move towards a larger solution, have a part in that larger solution, that sense of belonging can give you this resilience for sustained action and almost that sense of meaning. It's no longer so much about the personal sacrifice. Oh, I'm gonna not be buying this thing, and I'm not gonna be taking my car to work, or whatever it might be that you're trying to reduce your emissions, say that's the goal. It becomes more about I find joy in connecting with like-minded people who are trying to improve my immediate community. And that's also, again, relevant to disaster support and disaster recovery, because actually the way our brains are wired, when we become part of these collective movements, so in this case, a disaster recovery movement, say you're part of a psychological first aid group or a church group that's providing food aid or whatever it might be, that in itself can generate a sense of well-being within you that can really reduce the despair or just general sense of gloom that you might have because of the current state of the community, the disaster that just happened. And seeing that so many people are working together to just regenerate what's been lost, that can instill a sense of hope and meaning and produce resilience in the long term.
And I know that also you teach specifically a course called Climate Resilience. What have you learned in teaching that course? And has there been anything about how young people are responding to these ideas that is surprising or maybe not even surprising, but refreshing? Would love to invite you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's the Climate Resilience course is a course that we run UC-wide, so it runs across all 10 UC campuses. It's already begun at the campuses that are on the semester system, so Berkeley and Merced start the course in January, and then other campuses, all other 8 campuses started in end of March, early April, and in the springtime. And really, like I was just talking to you in the previous question, this sense of almost circular well-being. There's this community learning together. Our course is different in that we're not teaching students about climate change impacts, about emissions impacts. There's a lot of courses around that, and actually a lot of students have felt distress from those courses because they know that humans have not done great things for the planet, and so there's not so much in terms of solutions or even immediate solutions that they can be part of. Our course is more meant to address that distress and anxiety that exists in our youth. And really the goal of the course is to transform that distress into collective action, which I talked to you about already, how important that is. And the class is in that way very experiential. It has a university professor on each campus, but it also has a mindfulness teacher where we learn lessons of personal resilience. And I definitely emphasize the practice of mindfulness or skills of mindfulness. And it doesn't have to be that you have to sit in a spot in a Buddha-like frame and practice mindfulness for n minutes. It's really this concept about being present in the moment. And that's critical, again, going back to disaster times, because the traumas of the past do not need to seep into the present and go into the future. Staying in the present moment can be a hugely important skill to really keep these timestamps separate and really allow your cognitive systems to recuperate and not let them be hijacked by the emotional response that gripped you when the trauma first happened. So learning mindfulness skills is an important part of the class, and expanding from that, there's compassion, self-compassion, and not, beating yourself up that you're not doing too much. Many students and adults get burnt out because they feel like sometimes people want to do too much and they want to be part of bigger action, and how that action's not actually having important consequences that they would like, and then that leads to burnout. So how to be self-compassionate, and then from there practice active listening and compassion towards others, and then critically develop a class project where you can really engage in local climate action, and to really show that one, the exercise is in collective action, and the second, the exercise is in making meaningful local change, and understanding that local changes can have enough meaning that if they're sustained over time, they can have sort of global impact, in that there are parallels to that kind of project in many places. So like if there were students who did climate cafes, started climate cafes that then those conversations have kept going beyond the class. Others did some native tree planting, which has become very important post-disaster. There are lots of conversation around bringing back native plants as opposed to invasive species that burn up quickly, and so on. What your question, I kind of digressed into telling you more about how we do the class. Your question was about what I learned from it. And I love this class because it's this huge journey that students take coming in very skeptical about mindfulness, about just what is resilience. Yes, curious about it, but also skeptical what they're going to be able to do, having a sense of doom and gloom when they come in. And then just this whole arc that goes from a negativity and skepticism towards a sense of positivity and a sense of, I have efficacy, a self-efficacy, that I can play a role in the larger solution in climate action. Seeing that arc definitely inspires me to continue to do this work and makes me feel very positive. And there have been times when, a student would just quote something that we gave them a reading to, and I would just be blown away because I just missed that reading, and they'd come up with something that's deeply engaging and inspirational for the whole class, including us teachers. So a lot of the course is about community learning. It's less about us giving them any specific information that only we can provide. We are just guides and along their journey. So, and then also, I think the course also really emphasizes the love for nature and connecting with nature. And we talked about climate trauma also being defined in that context of this very close relationship that we have with nature, that we are the traumatizer, we are the traumatized. We're like in this circular relationship there too. And therefore, things that happen that are good for the planet are good for us too. And so we do nature meditations as well and have a nature retreat. But essentially seeing that always, I'm doing more planting in the summer and like, I love being in the dirt in my garden. It's just like reinvigorates my love to be outdoors or in the garden. So yeah, I get a lot out of that class. Yeah.
Amazing. Sounds like a great class. Well, this has been jam-packed with insights, and I'm so appreciative of your time. Because repetition increases retention, I think what I'd like to close with is, for those in Los Angeles who have fire brain of some form or another, what are, let's say, the top 3 recommendations you would make to them for how to take care of themselves and each other during this time?
Yeah, so there actually, when even from the experts, there are 4 cores to well-being. The first one is exercise. So any kind of physical movement that you can do, even if it's indoors, if the air quality is bad outdoors, be involved in moving around. Moving your body is great for your mind. That's number 1, exercise. Number 2 is breathing in a mindful way, in a just a regular breathing breath cycle way. Again, toxic air or smoke and that kind of exposure can give you shortness of breath, which can then trigger anxiety as well. So be mindful of the length of your breathing cycle. Try to take slower breaths, deeper breaths when you can. And if you're having shortness of breath, just see if you can either be out of that environment or just try to settle yourself in that state. Third is being positive and which includes being mindful, being self-compassionate, of just giving yourself a pat in the back if you got even one small thing done today. Firebrain does not allow big things to be done, and it's okay to just say, this is what I got done, and celebrate that accomplishment. And so positively affirm anything that you were able to do today. And then lastly, it's supporting each other. So social connection and support is very important. So exercise, breathing, positivity, and social support. Those are the cores of well-being that any resilience training will tell you. And yeah, hopefully you'll remember that.
Amazing. And could you just really quickly say where the psychological first responder course, where people can find that course, that you're doing a Zoom, which this will come out after the one tomorrow, but for the future ones?
Yeah, so there's, it's posted on LinkedIn right now, but the University of California is hosting a psychological first aid training on January 23rd, and then also weekly wildfire health and mental health informational seminars that are going to run every Thursday, 12 to 1 p.m. Over the next 6 weeks. So if you have time, you can catch those. I have a link to that on my LinkedIn, but if you Google University of California webinars, actually there's also all the information is also available on our website, which is Climate Resilience Online. So climateresilience.online.
Amazing. Well, Dr. Mishra, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today.
Of course, thank you for having this conversation with me.
This podcast is edited and produced by Adam Labrie and me, Jesse Damiani. The podcast is presented by Reality Studies. You can learn more by visiting realitystudies.co. And if you appreciate the work I'm doing, please subscribe and share it with someone you think would enjoy it.